Hi, my name is Mark. I'm a partner engineer on the ceramic team, and today I wanted to talk through OrbisDB through the lens of a demo that I built. And this particular demo is just showcasing an AI-powered chatbot, so you'll be able to exchange messages with an OpenAI API key or OpenAI API endpoint, and receive responses from the LLM. And before I get into all of that, all of setting up our demo app, I'll walk through what OrbisDB is. So OrbisDB, as displayed in our documentation, is a database implementation built on Ceramic, on the Ceramic network. It's built directly on decentralized event streams. So you get the same provenance and lineage that you would if you were working directly with Ceramic or with ComposeDB. And if you go to the website, you'll notice OrbisDB showcases itself as a decentralized database that also offers this set of plugins that allow for unlimited customization options. In my opinion, OrbisDB does a lot more than just offer plugins, but I'll talk through what plugins are, and I'll also talk through where I think OrbisDB really wins. So we'll jump to the tutorial, and I wrote a section here. I think that the hosted user interface, which we'll use to set up our models, to define the models that we'll need for our demo application, really makes it user-friendly for developers that want to get up and running quickly, but also see what they're doing in real time as they're defining their data models, defining relations between them. Also, the list of plugins I mentioned as like the second bullet point here. I think plugins are also great. There's kind of like unlimited possibilities in that realm. In short, plugins augment the data that you're already working with. So some of those use cases allow for gating or like automatic resolution of ENS domains, Sybil resistance, things like that. And I'll be walking through how to set up one of those, the ENS resolution one. I also think the OrbisDB SDK is great in the sense that it wraps a bunch of things all under one roof. So you have user authentication, you have client instantiation and querying, all of which sits in one SDK. Whereas if you've walked through some of our tutorials using ComposeDB, you'll notice we rely on different libraries for user authentication, and you have to know which ones to pick and choose from to make the same thing happen, whereas it's much more streamlined, in my opinion, going through the OrbisDB SDK approach. I think the fourth bullet point is, in my opinion, the most significant. The fact that you can get up and running as a developer really quickly on a shared hosted instance. And what that means in real terms is you can iterate and experiment in a much faster way without having to worry about local node setup and configuration. I think that removes a lot of the barriers for developers in just working with Ceramic overall. I think it makes things much more friendly, much more usable right out of the box. So let's go ahead and get started. I would first make sure you have a browser extension for a wallet. So I'm using MetaMask. You'll need Node locally installed. You'll need an OpenAI API key and a project ID from Wallet Connect. And there are instructions later on, which we'll go through to help you obtain each of those. Where I'll focus most of the time in this video is just on the OrbisDB Studio UI and configuring your account. So we'll do that in a bit. But first, let's go ahead and clone the repo. I've already done so locally, so I'm going to go ahead and open it up. I've already installed my dependencies, npm install. And the first thing we'll do is make a copy of the example environment file. So let's go ahead and do so. And you'll notice a few things in here. So you'll need to enter your value for the OpenAI API key. Your Wallet Connect project ID will be assigned to next public project ID. And then these values, profile ID, host ID, context ID, environment ID, all of these are going to be obtained from the hosted studio view. And like I said, I included instructions on both obtaining your OpenAI API key and your Wallet Connect project ID. But let's go ahead and skip straight down to OrbisDB setup. So if you click the link, I link directly to it. And I'm already logged in with MetaMask. So it knows who I am based on that login. You can see my did PKH here. This showcases my the wallet that I'm logged in with. And I'll walk through the steps as if I'm going through this from scratch. So we're going to need to define a new context. So if you're working with a shared instance, you'll need a context regardless. If you're setting up your own instance, which you can do with OrbisDB, I don't think you need a context. I think it's optional, but we'll go ahead and set this up. And just to talk about context really quickly, if you have different project environments that you want data models to be applicable for or relevant for, it's a great way to segment those data models and the corresponding data instances across those different contexts. You can even use the option of subcontext as well, which adds additional layers of kind of data organization into your logic. But just for the purpose of this demo, we'll walk through just setting up one context. So let's go ahead and do so. I'll call this new context demo AI. I'm not going to leave a description, so let's save that. And let's take a look. Cool. So if you look at this string of text right here, this is the corresponding ceramic stream ID that defines your context. And you're going to want to copy this. This will be the identifier you use in your environment variable. So we assign this to the context ID. So let's skip down to the next one. Okay, next we'll obtain our environment ID. So I'll show you where that lives. On the right-hand side, if you're just under your main view, you'll see your environment ID. So copy that. It will most likely be your did PKH identifier that's correspondent to the same wallet address that you signed in with. And copy that into next public environment ID. The next two identifiers that we'll set up are actually the ones that correspond to our data models. And I'll quickly walk through the format of the data that we're working with. So given that this is a AI chatbot application, we're using two very simple data models, one representing posts or messages. You can call it whatever you want, but simply put, it'll just keep track of each individual message that either we're sending or the chatbot is sending. But we also want some ability to identify both ourselves or the end user, whoever is logged in the browser, and the chatbot. And feel free to edit these, but we'll just go with these for now. So I'll also talk through stream ID and controller. So the first two fields that you see under both models, these are automatically generated for you every time you create a new instance. So you cannot and should not try to write to those fields. It will not work. Your controller will automatically be assigned to the authenticated user. So the authenticated user who's logged in, when they're creating a stream, that did what will automatically be assigned to the controller field. So let's go ahead and set them up. If you go under model builder, let's first set up posts. So just to make sure I'm identifying correctly, I'll do posts demo. All of these, actually, no. So we have 2 text and 2 datetime types. I'll do tag and body first, because those are text. So tag string, body string. And then we have edited and created, both of which are datetime. And created, which is datetime. Cool. Let's double check. Okay, we have everything. Also important to note, and I think I included this here. The account relation for posts is different than profiles, and I'll quickly talk about what that means. So when you're going through and assigning your account relation, which is this field, if you're setting it to list, what that means is any authenticated user can create kind of an unbounded, infinite number of model instances under that definition. So in this case, post demo, if I'm logged in through the front end, I can create as many as I want of this type of post demo. When we go ahead and define profiles, this will be a set account relation, which means any given authenticated user can only have exactly one or fewer instances of a given type as it relates to a given subfield. So one way I like to kind of describe this in an easy way is if you're an application developer who's building like kind of a marketplace and you have products and reviews, you might want to make sure that each user can only leave one review per a given product, but that user can make as many reviews as they want for different products as long as it's only one per product. So the relation between the review and the product would be the field that set is based on. In this case, what we're making sure is that we're setting the set account relation on the actor subfield, because our application is just going to assign and read data based on whether the actor subfield says it's human or it's robot, which I described here. We'll go over the actual code later. Okay, so post demo. Let's go ahead and publish this. We'll create our model and copy the value you see here into your environment file under post ID. Okay, profile. Like I said, we're going to want to set this one to set. And in this one, we have name, actor, emoji, and username, all of which are text. So that'll be easy. Name, actor, emoji. Cool. And let's make sure they're all set to string. Looks good to me. So let's create that one. 845. Set that as your profile ID. And another easy way to, at any point, if you wanted to just view the corresponding model ID for each of your tables, go to data. And if we go to profile demo, for example, you'll see it's the same one right there. Same with post demo. So, all right. And then off screen, I'm just going to enter the values of my API key, my project ID, because I want to keep those separate and secret. And assuming that you've went through all of those steps so far, that would take us to this section. So I cover a bit about where things live within the architecture of this application. I'll walk through the same thing here. So let's first start with how we're keeping track of state, and specifically the authenticated sessions for our user. So because we have multiple components that all need to access session state, and by session state, I mean when a user logs in, they log in, with their browser wallet, and they're first connecting their wallet, which is what our WAGMI wrapper allows them to do. And because all child components here are wrapped by this wrapper, we'll always be able to use those hooks. So for example, use account, anything that just simply tells us information about the authenticated user, but it won't tell us anything about their session as it relates to OrbisDB or Ceramic. And you can, I guess what we could have done is created another wrapper for OrbisDB. Instead, I went the route of just using Zustand for state management, and then using those hooks just to access state at all levels of and all components of our application. Just a matter of opinion, but I'll quickly walk through a few things. So we have this one method, start Orbis auth, where if there is a wallet client, which we're checking in our React component, we're then using the SDK to connect the user. And this specific call right here, orbis.connect user, this is what will generate a new signature request in the browser. And that signature, the result of that request, if you press yes, you accept, will create the session. And that session, I think the default scope is for 24 hours, it'll be valid. There's an option for connect to user if you don't want the session stored in local storage, you can disable that. For this application, I'm using local storage to store sessions for users. So I'll walk through later as we're booting up our app, where to actually find that. And then Orbis itself, this object is just our instantiation of the OrbisDB class. And for this, what I have hard-coded, but eventually if you were to move over to a standalone instance, you would have your own Ceramic gateway. This is just the endpoint of whatever Ceramic node you're using. In this case, we're using the one that comes from the shared instance found here. And then your OrbisDB node gateway would be the endpoint you put here. And again, the one we're using right now is the default shared instance endpoint. Environment is what we imported as our next public environment ID, which I just showed you how to place into your environment file. And so if you look at navbar, for example, which is where we're hosting our Web3 modal button, and you'll see this in the UI in a bit, we're first checking to see if local storage has a key value pair that matches Orbis session. And like I said, when you use this orbis.connect user, and if it successfully creates a new session for the user without any other arguments placed in here, it'll automatically save the session to local storage. And so what we can do on this lifecycle hook is check to see if that exists. And then if the expiration time, well, first, let's see. Yeah, so let's say we wanted to allow the user to switch between different accounts. that they have, we first want to check to see if the session matches the address that reflects the wallet that the user is connected with. So if it doesn't, we're automatically removing that. Otherwise, if the expiration time is greater than the current time, we also want to remove it. Otherwise, we're using set orbis session, which comes from, it's a method from our state, our Zustan state, and parsing the result of this orbis session key. So just one example, but because if you look at where we're placing that bar in the hierarchy, it sits, at the same level as whatever next like parent component comes in. This is why we wanted to use Zustan to kind of easily be able to access state at any level. So here, for example, just our homepage, we're first checking to see if there is an orbis session, so if it is defined, and if there is an address connected, which comes from use account, which is a WAGMI hook. We're rendering the message list. Otherwise, we're prompting the user to sign in. What else? I'll walk through reading data and writing data. So for developers who have used SQL or Postgres or another relational database with an ORM like Prisma or Drizzle, this experience will look it'll feel pretty familiar. Also Supabase, it'll feel pretty familiar. So for example, in our message list component, when we're when we're getting our messages, we're using our OrbisDB instance, and then we're selecting the columns that we want data from. We're also specifying which model or table we want the data from. So in this case, host ID corresponds to one of our environment variables that we've imported from the top. And then, because we're working off of a shared instance, you'll need the context as well. So in this case, we're assigning that, appending that to the query using .context. And then again, that's an environment variable that was imported at the top. And after we've ran our query, we can check to see if there is or are corresponding values, corresponding rows. I'll also walk through mutating data, so creating a post or creating a new message. It'll look somewhat familiar or somewhat similar to what we just walked through. Instead, you're swapping out the .select portion and the .from for .insert. And the value that goes in .insert is just the identifier that corresponds to your table. So in this case, it's your the model ID. So post ID if you're creating a new post. And then the values that you want. And you can also look at how we're doing that kind of in a similar way in our user form component, where we're checking to see if our chatbot has a profile, if we have a profile, like the authenticated user, and also on click allowing the user to update their own profile or update the profile for the robot. So now that we have everything we need, we've assigned our environment variables, we've kind of walked through the topography of the application. Let's go ahead and run it. So just run npm run dev. And go back to our browser. Cool. So as expected, because we're not connected, we don't have an active session, this is what's rendered on the page. We're prompted to connect our wallet. Once we're connected, we'll be able to see any corresponding messages. Also, I think what we're doing in our message list component is if there's no profile or no robot profile, we're automatically redirecting the user to profile to set one up. So we should expect that to happen once we connect our wallet. I'll also point out the session authentication message that you'll see in a bit. I'm going to connect with account one. So let's do that. Yeah, and this is what I mentioned earlier. So this is the second authorization message that you'll need to sign. It'll create that browser side session, and you can view when it expires, when it was issued. Once you've signed it, like I said, you'll be redirected to profile, but I'll also show you where that was stored in local storage. So right here, Orbis session, you can see the value there. Okay. So let's set up some values. Let's say user 123, something fun. Why not with a computer? Oh. Okay, there we go. Okay. I don't know why that's not working, but it's fine. I'll be this emoji, so I'll update my profile. Let's also create one for our robot, Mr. Robot. Great. So now that we've created streams for both of those, let's actually take a step back and look at our studio view. Because what's really cool about OrbisDB is you can actually visualize the data. So if I remember correctly, this is for profile demo. There we go. So you can see it in table format, which is great. We can kind of validate in real time that the data was correctly written, and you can also view what it looks like. Huge benefit. And back in our application, let's send some messages. So, hello, Mr. Robot. How are you today? And if you have an active OpenAI API key, your robot will respond. Hello, I'm just a computer program. Let's say I'm having a lot of fun working with OrbisDB. Yeah, OrbisDB is a powerful tool. Cool. So I'm going to show you a few things that I think are also really cool to help augment our data. The first of which, well, first I'll just show you the data that we just created. It was written here. And we're using the tag field as the differentiator between us or the authenticated user and the robot in order to determine, how these messages get rendered. You can actually look at where that lives in message based on tag. Yep. But what's really cool is how we can integrate relations and how we can integrate plugin data. Maybe I'll start with relation. So let's say we want to be able to grab the corresponding profile for each post. You can actually, through the UI, define that relation. So we're in posts right now. Right here, you'll see manage relations. Let's add a new one. From post demo to controller. So again, just as a reminder, your controller field will be automatically assigned to the authenticated did that wrote the stream or wrote that piece of data. And so we'll be able to call on that relation because they will match between posts and profile. Let's call it profile as the reference name, and we'll be able to use this in our query add relation. Cool. And so you can kind of see this working and validate in real time. There is an embedded both SQL editor and GraphQL editor. Let's experiment with the GraphQL one. So let's do, what was it? Posts demo. And we'll grab the body, tag, create a date. But then now, do you see how you're able to access your profile? So we should be able to pull corresponding values for those as well. Let's do name, username, emoji. Yeah, that's all we need. That's pretty awesome. So immediately the system recognizes that relation, and you can start using this in your application as well. What's also cool is how you can integrate plugins. And I mentioned I would use the ENS plugin just to show you how that works. So under plugins, right now we have a few choices. And just as a quick aside about plugins, you can use the ones that come out of the box here. But if you're running your own instance of OrbisDB, you can create your own in a completely permissionless way and start using that immediately in your application. So we'll use one of the pre-configured ones. We'll do ENS. I already have it installed. And you will need an RPC endpoint. So I've already set that up, but I'll show you how to actually assign it to a context and use it. It won't backdate data, but for all new incoming data after you've set up the plugin, it will work. So let's assign it to a new context. Demo AI. And we want to do address to name. Let's define it on controller. You can do it on any field where you plan on storing either address or did data, but we know the controller contains our did, so we'll do that. I'm going to scope it for all models, but you do have the option of entering a specific model that you want it applicable for. I'll just do it across all. So let's do save. So now if you go to data, let's go back to post demo. You'll see this plugins data here. And like I said, it's expected to be empty right now because it won't backdate, like retroactively fill fields that have already been written. But if we create a new exchange, let's do what do you feel about ENS? And so now if we look at this stream, it should have a value assigned in plugins data. There you go. That's pretty cool. Let's also go back to GraphQL and see how we can access it. So if you go to plugins data, you can just query that field and you'll see it show up. So obviously it won't show up for the ones we created before we set it up, but for those more recent two that just came through, you can see that it resolved to our ENS correctly. That's pretty much all the demo walks through and the tutorial walks through. I certainly hope you learned something new about using OrbisDB, about what OrbisDB is, and the different things it might be able to unlock for your decentralized data needs. And certainly reach out if you have any questions. I'll link both to this tutorial and the necessary repos that you will need in the description. But until next time, thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.